Hello everyone, my name is Jacob Kempf. Today I'm presenting to you the first in what is planned to be a new documentary-style series entitled Life Stories. This series will highlight individuals who have demonstrated resilience, perseverance, tenacity, and integrity when presented with a life-changing event. In this first episode, I open us here, at the Flight 93 National Memorial in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, the location where United Airlines Flight 93 crash-landed after it was hijacked during the attacks of September 11, 2001. I was in the 4th grade on the day of those events, and while I have my own memories of that day, they are nothing compared to the two individuals, Jim and Ken, whose stories you will hear today.
My name is Jim Johnston. I go by JJ. I am from New York City, Staten Island, and I currently work for a government agency. I live in Northern Virginia. I have lived in Northern Virginia since 1997. I was working for the Federal Aviation Administration. At the time, I was a supervisor at Kennedy Tower in New York, and I was asked to come down to Northern Virginia to the FAA's command center to bring expertise in the New York traffic flow issues and air traffic control experience into the command center. I had a very good childhood. I was raised in Staten Island, New York. My father was an air traffic controller. Actually, he was high ranking in the FAA at some point in his career. My mother worked in Manhattan as an executive assistant to a chief operating officer for a brokerage company. I had a sister younger than I. Actually, we're Irish twins. She's 364 days younger than I am. So one day a year we actually are the same age. Had a great childhood. I went to Catholic grammar school and a Catholic high school. Played some sports, primarily baseball. Enjoyed photography and aviation. When time came for me, when I graduated high school, I really wanted to stay home and go to college in Manhattan. My parents insisted that I try leaving Staten Island, going to college, even if it was just for 1 year, and I could always come back. When I was young, my father would take myself and my sister on occasion to work. He was an air traffic controller at Kennedy as well. He also worked at Newark Tower in New Jersey and the New York Center out on Ronkonkoma, Long Island. And traditionally, on long breaks from school, I would get to go into work with him on a midnight shift and get to observe the operations and even at times talk to airplanes when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. I went to school in New Hampshire, aviation college, and decided to pursue the path that my father had as an air traffic controller. Well, I was assigned to the FAA's Air Traffic Control System Command Center in Northern Virginia, and I was put in the terminal unit, which is for airports on the eastern coast of the United States, and we had oversight of the airports on the East Coast, from Boston to Miami and everything in between. We would deal with flow issues, flow capacity, traffic management initiatives, miles and trail, ground delay programs to slow the flow of traffic if there was some sort of encumbrance like thunderstorms or snowstorms and things of that nature. So on the morning of 9/11, I had a day shift at our command center in Northern Virginia, and the typical shift ranged from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. So it was a beautiful morning driving in through the Virginia countryside. Traffic was very light. The sky was crystal clear. Beautiful sunrise, very tranquil. The night before, or the day before, September 10th, was a very busy day in the command center. It was a very active day with thunderstorms. There was a large cold front that went through and caused a lot of disruption to the air traffic system. And we were very busy with reroutes, with ground stops, diversions, and so forth. So Tuesday morning, 9/11 was a welcome relief, because it meant that in September the summer is kind of winding down, and the crazy days of summer thunderstorms and the last one that previous evening are starting to fade away, and it should be fairly smooth sailing for the next few months with relatively good weather until the snowstorms start to hit and impact the national airspace system. And that morning I was in the severe weather unit, which is responsible for issuing reroutes around thunderstorms and other capacity problems. And it was lining up to be a very quiet day. As I said earlier, the storms were well off the coast and no longer a factor, and routes were really not required, so it was going to be a slow day. Around 8, a little after 8, we got a call from Boston Center, which is located in Nashua, New Hampshire, and they're responsible for air traffic control above flight level 180, or above 18,000 feet in the New England area. And they called and said they believed they had an aircraft that just got hijacked. And we were like, what? A hijack? You know, we hadn't experienced a hijack in the United States for quite some time. In fact, in 1992, there was a hijacked Lufthansa airline that came over from Germany and landed at JFK, and I happened to be working that day in the tower at JFK. So it had been a long time since we heard there was a potential hijack, and the air traffic controller on the other end of the line said that we asked them what gave them the impression, and they stated that the flight had ceased communication with the center, that they had basically turned off their transponder, which allows us to track them, and then they had made a deviation off their flight plan that they were cleared on. They had turned southbound and basically were heading south down the Hudson River from around the Albany area. So those were certainly indicators that something was definitely wrong. So another supervisor, myself, went into the main briefing room at usually around 8:30 every morning. There was a major roundup of what happened in the National Airspace System the day before. So the gentleman that was in charge of the operations floor, Mr. Ben Sliney, was in that meeting, and we entered the room and whispered in his ear, Ben, you need to come on the floor. We believe we have a hijack. And he said, a what? A hijack. Interestingly enough, Mr. Sliney was the National Operations Manager, and that meant he was the lead manager on the floor that morning. It also was his first day as National Operations Manager. Now, he is an experienced air traffic controller. He had worked in the command center, but it was his first day as the NOM. And he came out onto the floor, and we started to receive reports from New York Center about that primary, we call a primary track that does not have its secondary transponder on. And we were receiving reports of its progress from New York Center, and they were giving basically a range and bearing from New York City, and it was still proceeding southbound. And then they said they had lost the track 15 miles northwest of JFK, and that was New York City. Maybe minutes later, there was breaking news that an aircraft had hit the World Trade Center North Tower. I got a phone call from the New York TRACON radar room, and I knew the gentleman. I worked with him in New York, Tommy White. He asked me, what we knew. He said they believed that a helicopter had hit the World Trade Center, and I said, Tommy, that was no helicopter. That was a American Airlines jet. Shortly thereafter, we received another report that another aircraft was heading southbound towards New York City. As we were getting updates on what was happening with the North Tower and other aircraft in the system, the news agencies had photographs, a video of the smoke pouring out of the World Trade Center. I can remember we had these huge television screens that lined the front of the room, and we would watch events on there, or we would put air traffic displays, weather displays up there. And in this huge picture, they had an angle, and the United aircraft, the second aircraft that got hijacked, crashing into the South Tower, and that explosive fireball that went through the building and just showered debris. And we knew at the time then something obviously this was a coordinated type of an event. We stopped traffic eventually. Anything coming to and from New York, and the common denominator of the aircraft that had been hijacked going to the West Coast, we stopped things from coming and going to the West Coast. And then we started to receive additional reports out of Washington Center, Cleveland Center, that there were other aircraft, American 77, then United 93. Indianapolis Center, I believe it was, reported that American 77 had made a U-turn and started to head back towards Washington, D.C. And it was, at that point we knew, we didn't know how many aircraft would be taken over, what was behind it. Mr. Sliney basically said, we're at war with somebody. Ground stop everything and shut the airspace down. We initiated conference calls with our control facilities, and we use advisories. We would type up advisories. Usually they were for traffic management initiatives, and this one was unprecedented, shutting down the national airspace system. And to this day, that advisory is hung on the entrance and the wall of the command center as a reminder of what happened that day. Before the towers collapsed, I personally, having had lived in New York for most of my young life, I was also a fireman on Long Island. And a lot of the firemen in Long Island were firemen in New York City. They were instructors, they were members of the fire department. My sister lived in Staten Island and was commuting, I know, to her job in Manhattan. And I feverishly got the phone, tried to call her. I was able to get through to her. She was in Brooklyn, approaching the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which goes into Lower Manhattan. And I told her, whatever you do, do not go into Manhattan. If you have to tell the bus driver to stop and get off, get off. Do not go into Manhattan. And as it turned out, the bus was in a lot of traffic, and the towers had collapsed shortly thereafter, and in their plain view. And obviously they never made it into Manhattan, fortunately for them. But I knew at that time that the world was going to change forever. And that was unbelievable that to see the towers fall. When I worked at Kennedy Tower, on every given evening, we would look out to the west and we could see the Twin Towers. They were majestic, all kinds of weather, whether it be rain or beautiful sunsets. As we looked to the west, usually with the setting sun, they were illuminated. It was beautiful, and we almost took that sight for granted. And in that moment, they would be no longer, and that was very disturbing, and also the likelihood that some firemen, police officers that I knew were at the site could have been injured and killed. As it turned out, I knew several that were killed, and also people that worked there. I remember turning to my colleague, Harry Bergman, and saying to Harry, I said, "This is unbelievable. We have a front row seat to history." And he said, "No, JJ, we're making history today." We worked very closely with the NAV Canada, the Canadian Air Traffic Control System. They were stressed as we did not allow anything to come into the United States airspace, and there were some stories, even a play, I believe, about small towns or airports that opened up their homes to all these people that were stranded on aircraft that were put down in Canada, and they had no way to get out of Canada, no meal, no hotel, nothing. So it was very, very hectic for quite a while. During the attacks, President Bush, was down in Sarasota, Florida, and Air Force One departed, and there was a concern for the safety of the president, so they did not return directly back to Washington, D.C. They ended up going to Louisiana, and then eventually Nebraska, and then later that evening returned to Washington, D.C. And we worked very closely with the controlling centers as Air Force One relayed some requests, and they were relayed to us in the command center, and we were able to help facilitate what the pilots needed and wanted at the time. Well, it had a profound effect on my life. It changed the entire trajectory of my career. Obviously, it changed the entire trajectory of the lives of a lot of people that I knew and loved, and not in a good way. There were numerous firemen that I knew personally that were killed. There were family friends that had members killed in the collapse. One gentleman notably that was a good friend was a Port Authority police officer in the emergency services unit named George Howard. And George was stationed at JFK Tower at JFK, and he would often visit the tower. He would come up and say hi to the controllers and hang out in the tower. In fact, one time I remember him rappelling off the control tower to check the means of egress in case there was a fire or something along those lines. He would arrange for the fire trucks from the Port Authority come over on Sunday morning and pick up some of the controllers and take them to the firehouse for breakfast, and then bring them back and take the second wave or shift, if you will, over for the same. Great person. But George also was an instructor in the Nassau County, New York Fire Academy, and he taught rope techniques and rappelling. And I took a class with him as the instructor, and he always had lighthearted moments and jokes. George was off duty the morning of 9/11, but immediately realized the gravity of the situation and went in on his day off to see whatever he could do to help. And unfortunately, George was killed in the collapse. President Bush visited the site, and during that time, his mother, George Howard's mother, gave President Bush one of George's badges. And the president addressed the nation several days later in a national address in the evening. And he held up George's badge, and he says he had that badge as a reminder of a task that never ends. Professionally, for me, I had pretty much gone to the command center to gain experience and eventually move up in the FAA air traffic organization as operations manager, maybe continue. I was a assistant chief at JFK for many years, but maybe become a chief somewhere and become higher management in the FAA air traffic organization. But shortly after the attacks on 9/11, the FAA stood up a collaborative security unit with multiple government agencies, and I was asked if I would go over and lend some aviation expertise at this command center that was established to protect and ensure the air defense and air security over Washington, D.C. So that was something that never existed prior to 9/11. So I went over there and supervised a team of air traffic controllers that worked closely with the Department of Defense, the Secret Service, the Capitol Police, the TSA, Coast Guard, Military District of Washington, and other agencies that were charged with protecting the airspace over the national capital. I spent 13 years in that capacity and worked many sensitive missions, was involved in a lot of security situations. Fortunately, most of them resolved positively, but really had an opportunity to get ingrained in and assist with almost every three-letter agency that was in the federal government, and it was completely different, but it was something that I wanted to do, and I was able to take my aviation expertise and apply it to this new problem set, this global issue of security and terrorism, and it gave me a sense of satisfaction to be able to make my contribution on behalf of the people that I knew that were killed at the hands of the terrorists. It has been an honor for me to work alongside the military and federal, state, and local law enforcement, government agencies of all types, and that work tirelessly day and night, 365 days a year, to protect the citizens of this nation, both here at home and abroad. And I hope as we approach the 20th anniversary that everyone pauses to take note of what occurred that day and never forget what happened. And I equate some of it to when I was younger, and the attacks on Pearl Harbor were very devastating, obviously, and instigated World War II. However, I was not alive at that time, and although I learned about it, it was something in the history books. 9/11 I lived through, and not only did I live through it, I was heavily involved in it, and it carries with me throughout my life. And I hope the young people learn about it and never forget the men and women that served that day, the men and women that innocently were killed that day, and patriots, all of them. And I just hope that we as a nation don't ever forget that. I also was very impressed with, as a nation, how everyone pulled together, and there was no political divide, there were no other divides. It didn't matter. You attacked America, you attacked our home, and we collectively rallied around that. And and sometimes, unfortunately, it takes serious situations for some of us to remember, what it's like to be a decent countryman, a decent human being, and I just hope that we can keep that spirit alive without the tragedies that might follow.
My name is Ken Siegel. I'm from currently now Naples, Florida, after living essentially my whole life in New Jersey. And I'm also currently retired as of the end of 2020. So this year, I've been doing things more or less on my own terms, which has been very nice. I worked in New York City, most recently for a company called Fiduciary Trust Company. Growing up, I was in a very traditional household, two parents. I have one sibling, a sister, who is now living in Massachusetts. Um, Basically, also growing up in New Jersey in a suburban area, which was very nice and very boring at the time. I was in a town called Highland Park, New Jersey. At the time, when you're young and growing up, there's nothing to do. It's very quiet. But in retrospect, realize that that's exactly the kind of place that a family wants their kids to grow up in. So it was actually, again, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it's a very nice town. There's again not that much to do, which means you can't get into too much trouble, which was good. Probably why my parents had moved there. I had friends that we would play after school every day. Friends that we got together on weekends and things. And once I got into high school, I got involved in sports. I ran track and developed lots of really great friendships there. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, I just did what I obviously normally would do, not knowing what was coming. And I worked in the World Trade Center, two World Trade Center to be specific. And in fact, that was known more or less in the news as the South Tower. So there's the South Tower and the North Tower. We always refer to it as two World Trade Center versus the North Tower being one World Trade. I arrived at work as I normally did around 7:30 in the morning at that time. And in fact, again, I was in the investment business. And so there was quite a bit of work that is always pending. So when you leave the night before, there's always something to do as soon as you get in the next morning. And one of my colleagues was at her desk at the time, who I sat right next to. And I went over to talk to her about one of the companies that we were about to invest in that morning. So it was about 7:40 now at this time. And we were just having a chat. Now, just to be specific about how the building is set up, the World Trade Center was a square, basically a square building. And I sat on one of the sides inside, but on one of the sides where the windows are. And I was facing north. My desk faced north towards the Empire State Building. So from my perspective, I was on the 94th floor of the World Trade Center. You could see the Empire State Building and all of Midtown Manhattan. And also because of how both one and two World Trade Center were set up, they weren't right next to each other. There was an angle between them. The North Tower was a little bit further north from the South Tower, hence the name. And so if you looked out the window as you're facing north, you could see one side of One World Trade Center, the other tower. Okay, so we're having a conversation this morning, and I hear this noise outside, what sounded like outside of just our window that we could look out of, and didn't know exactly what that was. It was like a clunking noise of some sort. And then I got up and I looked out the window, and I'm kind of craning my neck a little bit to see what's going on. And I glance over at the North Tower, One World Trade, and I see about 10 stories of that building blow out in a fireball. And I immediately thought, oh my goodness, 1,000 people probably just lost their lives. And this is around 8:45, 8:50 in the morning, right about then. I never saw an airplane. I had no idea what was going on there. I thought to myself at that moment, this looks too intense to be a gas leak or something, something internal that caused that. And I thought it had to have been a bomb. So I thought it's very possible that terrorists are back and there something happened. A bomb went off in the first tower. And I thought to myself, I have to get out of here. We all have to get out of here. And I ran back into my own cubicle at that time. I didn't even run to the back of the cubicle, which is a step and a half, to get my briefcase that had my phone in it, my cell phone. I just reached into my closet that was right by the aisle, right where people would walk by, and I got my suit jacket and just have that, which had my wallet and money and so forth in there. And we all took off. We went to the elevator. Now we're pressing the buttons by the elevator, and at this point, we're trying to we have to get down 94 floors. Now, the way the World Trade Center is set up is there was an express elevator from the ground level, from the lobby to the 78th floor. So that's just a very, very large elevator car that could probably hold 40 people or so. And that went express from the ground floor at 78 and vice versa. And then once you got off at 78, if you're looking to get to your floor, then there were local elevator banks. And I'm pressing the elevator button. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to count to 3. If this elevator doesn't open, I'm taking the stairs and walking down to 78th floor because I'm not waiting. And it did not open. And so I go to the fire exit and start walking down the stairs. At that time, pretty much almost every floor that you're walking past now, people are coming out into the hallway, into the stairwell, also joining and walking down. I was with a different colleague at this point, who was I worked very closely with, and it was a great guy. And he said he had heard that a small plane, like a private plane, may have crashed into the first tower, and it probably wasn't anything serious, but it was just a terrible, terrible accident. And all I could think of was it couldn't have been a small plane because that explosion that I saw was just absolutely tremendous. So we both kept walking down. We got to the 78th floor, the elevator lobby there. And he basically said, I'm going to go back upstairs to my desk and give my wife a call, let her know I'm okay. And I just said, okay, well, I hope everything's okay. I'm heading down. And when we got onto that elevator lobby in the 78th floor, I thought the exact same thing as on 94. If there is not an elevator right there to open to take me down, I'm going to get back in the stairwell and start walking down 78 floors. Thank God there was an elevator door that was open. It was full. It was pretty packed, and I just kind of squeezed my, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, I'm coming in also. And then the doors closed, and it made it down to the lobby. Doors opened up. At that point, there were police and security guards in the lobby level who were starting to direct people, and they said, "Okay, you have to leave the building, leave the building." And so a bunch of us got out. I found another colleague who was already down there as well, and we start walking, and we're now outside on the street level, outside of the World Trade Center. And I'm looking around, and I see on the ground all over the place, everywhere I'm looking, chunks of cement, chunks of glass from the blowout from the first tower, One World Trade. And it was like a ticker tape parade. It was paper was just flying from the sky and just lofting its way down to the ground. And then I looked over at the other tower, and just smoke, just black smoke, was billowing out of the sides of the building. So I'm with another friend, another colleague from work, and we start walking south. I thought I'm going to head to Battery Park, which is about 3 or 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. I'm just going to hang out there until I kind of get the word I can at least go back into my building, get my briefcase, get my phone, then maybe I'll go home or do whatever. And as we're about a half a block away, all of a sudden I hear what sounds like a missile. I didn't see anything, but I hear just like a high-pitched whistle sound. And I'm thinking, what is this? And boom, an explosion. And again, at that point, what's going through my head is I have to take cover somewhere, because otherwise my head's going to get lopped off from all of this glass and cement that's all over the place. I find my way to a restaurant. There was a restaurant on a side street that was open at that time, serving breakfast. And I just go running inside. At this point, I lose contact now with the other person who I was walking with. And I go into this restaurant, and I quickly run downstairs, because I just remember hearing, oh, things are being bombed. You want to be in the basement. You want to be in a shelter. I don't know, but I didn't want to be on the ground level. If we're under attack now and missiles are coming into the city, I guess I want to be away from doors and glass and that kind of thing. So I ran down into the basement of this building, and I immediately tried. There was a payphone there, so I tried to call my wife, Robin, but the telephones were out. There was no telephone service at all. And I just stayed down there until I kind of caught my breath, because I was hyperventilating a bit at this point. My thought was, again, New York City's under attack, and I'm not sure what to do next. I went back upstairs to see if any of the employees had heard anything of what was going on, and they had their televisions on. And at this point now, obviously, both of the towers had been hit by airplanes. And they were starting to replay and show on the news, which I saw on TV, that it were these big jetliners. It wasn't, you now knew they weren't small craft, and B, that it wasn't just an accident. So within a minute or two, the restaurant people said, "Look, we're closing now. Everyone has to leave. We're closing. We're getting out of here." So okay. So I walk out on a side street, about, again, a block or two from the World Trade Center, and I'm just looking up, and it's just black smoke is billowing now from both towers. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm not going back to work today, so I have to think of how I get out of here. What's my exit strategy? The oddest thing happened as I'm standing there. I'm now looking around, and I'm just looking at people, and everybody is just frozen in their tracks, looking at both towers. I immediately went to the closest subway station. The people on the subway had no idea what was going on. They're coming in from Brooklyn and Queens and so forth, and they don't know what's happening. They're underground for the past 20 minutes. My plan at this point was, I'm going to take the subway uptown, because I knew I couldn't get back to New Jersey the way I started, which was through the half train and into Newark. Um, I'll try and take the subway up to Midtown, get across to Penn Station, New York, and take a train from Penn Station back into New Jersey. Now, at this time, it's about 9:30 in the morning, 9:25, something like that. I did get on one of the subways. I'm making my way uptown. No one there knows what's happening at this point. I get off the subway and I'm able to kind of maneuver underground to get across from like Lexington Avenue over to 7th Avenue where the train is. And I made my way to Penn Station. At that point, I was fortunate enough to have caught what I think may have been the last train out of New York City that day, or at least from Penn Station at about 10 to 10. That was going to that was going to New Jersey. And at that point, I was able to call Robin. I was with other people who had their phones, and I called her and I just left a message with her. She was taking our son Eric to school that morning, and I was one of the first ones to get a hold of her. And I left a message saying, "Listen, something terrible happened at the World Trade Center, but I'm okay, and I'll keep you posted as I make my way. I'm going to try and make my way, home." So, I mean, that was essentially that day. I got out, thankfully, without a scratch, without one particle of smoke or asbestos. There were visions and images of people who have stayed in the area. The buildings collapsed. Even if they survived the collapse, they were just covered in soot and dust and so forth. I didn't experience any of that. And my upbringing, as I pointed out rather quickly, was very unremarkable. I grew up just sort of thinking that the world is a fine place. The world is a good place. People are good. When you get older, you can do anything. You can travel. You can go any place. Oh, love Americans, and it's just because we're good people. And I just assumed, almost up until that moment on September 11th, I just assumed that almost the rest of the world was like that, even though at that time I was 41 years old, but still, believe it or not, naive to the extent that I didn't think this kind of thing really could ever happen here, or maybe even never paid attention that something like this even ever happened elsewhere. So, number one, it certainly changed my life in terms of my perception of the rest of the world. And what does that mean? And all of a sudden, it became very clear in a very short period of time. There are people out there and countries, governments that are absolutely true enemies to the United States. And American doesn't necessarily mean someone like you and me, white males or white females, because people who died in the World Trade Center were Muslim, were Indian, were Jewish, were Asian, were white, were across the spectrum. They were everything. But what was the biggest commonality? They were American. And so that's what became clear to me, is now that there are countries and governments out there that would be happy to just see us sort of, off the face of the planet if they could do that. That was a real slap in the face to all of a sudden have to kind of face up to that and think about that. Number two, it made me realize at that point, because I didn't travel a lot in my work, but I, I I had to go to different cities for a night, maybe 2 nights at a time. And there were occasions where I might miss something that, for instance, our two sons might have been involved in it. So boom, right after 9/11, you think about, it really focuses your mind on what is it that's important. And it's like, okay, it's your family first and foremost. There's no question about it. So my thought was at that point, I will never miss an event that either Ian or Eric was in at school, whether it was a concert, whether it was a game, or whether it was a volleyball tournament or whatever, simply because I might have a meeting at work that was going to the last 20 minutes too long and I'm going to now not be able to get the train home on time. No, no, no. I'm going to leave early from that meeting. I'm not missing anything anymore. And same with Robin. I mean, same thing. When we had plans to do things, I'm not putting them off because we're. And then probably third and most importantly of all of these was spirituality throughout this whole thing. Growing up, I grew up in I'll even say traditional, but probably non-traditional Jewish family. Both of my parents are Jewish, but non-practicing. And we never went to temple together. We never prayed together. It was only very, very superficial in terms of the holidays when the Jewish holidays came up. They didn't really observe. After I was bar mitzvahed, I didn't observe really either. But this made me really think about a lot of things. And I'll share with you one very significant experience in my life. In fact, the most significant experience in my life that moved me into this direction. Shortly after 9/11, our company lost over 90 people. And I worked very closely with a lot of them. I would say 25 or 30 of them. I knew very well and worked almost every day with those people. Week after week, we would get emails from our human resources department saying that, okay, on Tuesday of this week, there's going to now be a memorial service in this town, maybe out in Long Island in this church or so and so. And then on Wednesday, there's another memorial out in New Jersey for this person. And on Tuesday of the following week, there's one for, another colleague in Connecticut, and so on and so forth. And so I just went to memorial service after memorial service, and every story, every time, it would just rip me apart. One very, very quick story. I worked closely with this one guy. His mother-in-law worked floors up from where he did. So when the first plane hit the other tower, we all knew something was going on. He called his wife, and he basically said, look, we don't know what's going on, but I'm going to go get your mother, and we're going to exit together, and we'll be home when we can. And long story short was they both didn't make it out. So when I went to that memorial service, this widow was now mourning her husband, her mother. They had 2 kids. I mean, it was just one of the most painful moments you can possibly live through. I just became so heavy. My heart was so heavy for everything that was happening, and I was just constantly sad. I couldn't snap out of it. And one day, again, now I don't know, it was probably mid or late October, a month and a half later, maybe it was November, I don't recall. There was another memorial service for a guy who I worked with, who was another portfolio manager, same as I was, in a town up in North Jersey. And this was at a church where so many people showed up to his service that not everyone could fit into the building itself, but they opened up the back of the church outdoors and put up a tent so that everyone could attend the service. And during that service, I just looked up and I said, God, I can't take this sadness anymore. I just can't do it. I can't live like this anymore. And I felt a physical something like vibration almost in my body. I felt the presence of some sort. Again, I'm not that at this point, I'm not that spiritual or religious, okay? But something physically happened to me at that moment in time. And when that change stopped, I just felt lighter, and I just felt like everything, all of these problems, all of this worry and concern was just physically removed from my body and taken away. And I was a new person. I never had anything like that happen to me before, and I never had anything happen to me like that since. that was such a significant moment that in my mind, until the day I die, I know for a fact, and that there is a God, that He does listen, He hears, and He will answer. He answered. From that moment, I knew I have to figure this out, and that's finally where Robin comes in so importantly in my life, because she had always been taking both of our boys to the Nassau Christian Center in Princeton, New Jersey, just a town over from where we lived. I never went with them. A few years had gone by from 9/11, but I was still searching, and essentially I joined her and Ian and Eric, and we would go together on Sundays. I would listen. It all made sense to me. I eventually was baptized there, and I've accepted, Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And so there's a very, very spiritual side of this whole thing. And having done that also puts a completely different sort of view on how you look at the world as well. And it makes it, I think, a little bit more, I don't know if palatable is the right word. Because, I mean, people still hate Americans and people still want to see them, gone. But at the same time, there's more to it than that now. And I think I've come to accept that there's a plan, there's a will, God's will, and it's our job to figure out or do His will, in whatever way that.